Okay, so we're just going to continue from last time. We started talking about Jdbc, where you're going to want to programmatically access your database. That is, write code. Every language supports something like this, but for us, it's going to be Jdbc, Java Database Connectivity API, where you write code to connect to a database, process data, pull data from the database, do whatever you need to do with it in your application, persist data, save data back to the database if you need to, et cetera, et cetera. And again, every language is going to support something like this. If you remember, I don't know if we did it or not, but there is a lab in Computer Science 1 that I use ODBC for C. So if you're using C, you'd use Open Database Connectivity API. If you're using Python, you'd do something else. If you're using C#, you'd use, I forget what it's called, but DAO, is Data Access Objects or something like that. Anyway. The idea here is that we are going to programmatically connect to an API, not to any particular database. We don't want to write code that connects to MySQL, because if we ever switch from MySQL over to SQL Server, then we'll have to rewrite all of our code. So dependency inversion. We are going to write code that connects to an API, application programmer interface. Then it's vendors' responsibilities to come in and provide an actual interface for it, or what's called a driver, right? So like Oracle, IBM, or whatever, they would publish a driver that's an implementation of that API in that particular language for their database, and that's called a driver, right? So to download the driver for Jdbc for MySQL, you need to search around for Connector J, is what it's called, Connector J, and the current version is 8032. I would just go ahead and go with platform independent. That's the whole purpose of Java anyway. It's platform independent. Go down with a zip file or a tarball or whatever. It's eventually going to look something like this, where you've got, once you extract it, what you're looking for is that one jar file in there, right? So over here in our Eclipse project, let's go ahead and create a new folder. You should already have this, a lib folder, from previous bringing in previous libraries. Let's go ahead and copy this over. Right, copy that, and then we'll add it to our build path. Right-click, build path, add to build path. Now we're set up to connect to a MySQL database. You can imagine that if you were connecting to multiple different databases, that you would have multiple different jars here, and you'd have something called a driver manager that would need to manage all those things. But since we're only connecting to one database here, it's not that big of a deal, and we can just go ahead and connect to it. All right, so remember that we are online. The last session we had, it dropped us like with 5 minutes to, left, but otherwise it seems like it's going okay now. But anyway, if you have questions, go ahead and post to the live stream here. Nobody's watching the live stream, never mind. All right, so be it. All right, so to get started, what we need is a way to connect to the database, a way to prepare statements, and then to get a result set back so that we can actually process it. And Jdbc provides 3 classes that represent those things. There are dozens and dozens of other classes, believe me, but these are the classes that we're going to want to focus on. In fact, we're going to keep it simple and only focus on these. There are statement classes that are not prepared statements. You do not want to use them. Later on, we'll see why with little Bobby tables. I think we've taken a look at it before, but we'll take a look at it again. I should also mention, before we get into the actual demonstration, that there are what are called ORMs, Object Relational Mappings, and that is one of the advanced topics that we cover in this section, either at the end or towards the end of the semester or something like that, where you do not have to write any Jdbc code at all. Instead, you annotate your classes and say that this variable in this class is connected to that column in that table, and it takes care of everything for you. It loads stuff up, it updates stuff, it does all the CRUD, create, retrieve, update, and destroy for you. But it's built on top of Jdbc, so that's where we'll focus first. Okay? All right, so we need 3 things. I forget how far we got last time, but we need 3 things. The first thing is going to be a URL. Right? We're going to be connecting to the CSE server, cse.unl.edu. That's not the connection string that we need to use. We need to use a much more complicated connection string here. Right? There we go. So did you get all that? Copy that down? No, don't worry about it. It'll be in your lab. It'll also be in the notes when I post this code. The protocol is kind of like HTTPS. If you go to a website, that's the hypertext transfer protocol over a secure socket layer. This is different. This is the JDBC protocol using MySQL. We're going to connect to cse.unl.edu. You're going to change this because you cannot connect to my database. You'll connect to your database. And then the rest of this stuff is just configuration stuff that's necessary because of quirks on the CSE server. Okay. There's our URL. Over here in MySQL Workbench, what else did we need? A username and a password. Once we've got those three things, string username is equal to, for today, I will do me, right? Otherwise, you're going to have to change that to your username or your partner's username, whichever one you want to use. And then a password, right? Password. Remember, that's the most common password, right? So maybe I use that. Right? We'll find out if I use that in here in a second or not. Now what we want is, one, make your connection. Right? So to do that, I use a driver manager because a driver manager is what's responsible for creating connections and managing the driver jar file over here. So let's go ahead and create a connection, which is represented by the connection class. I'll call it con. Right? No. There we go. And I'm going to instantiate it by calling driver manager dot get connection using the URL, the username, and password. There we go. And I need to import this. All right. Now, I think we talked about this very briefly, but as a review, remember that JDBC is kind of old. And so it was back when they thought that that checked exceptions were still cool. Nobody thinks that anymore. In fact, that newer stuff, those ORMs like JPA, they corrected all the issues. They realized that no checked exceptions are not cool. We will have no checked exceptions at all, unchecked exceptions. But we're still living with JDBC here. So we will surround this with a try-catch. Okay? What do we do with checked exceptions that we cannot reasonably recover from? We throw them as a runtime exception. Right? We rethrow them. We catch and release. We catch that exception and then throw it back as a runtime exception so that we don't have to deal with it. Why don't we want to deal with it? Well, what happens when I don't have a correct password? Can you reasonably recover from access denied? Nope. What if you misspelled the server name? There we go. Can you reasonably recover from a server that does not exist? The DNS, DNS, what does DNS stand for? Anybody know? Domain name service? Something like that. That is responsible for taking a URL in plain old English, cse.unl.edu, and looking up the IP address and telling you where to actually go, right? If there's no such thing as CS, or here, let's update it. SOC was what it should be now, right? School of Computing. There's no such thing. But it's really thinking hard about it. Whoa. Wow, it's really thinking hard about it. There must be something in the DNS server that's they might have registered it, and I don't know. If you go to soc.unl.edu in a web browser, maybe there's a redirect. Okay, yeah, there's, oh, hey, it's live. Okay, so the DNS server is coming back with a positive. It's probably just redirecting back to cse.unl.edu or something like that. Oh, wait, no, sorry. No, we'll never be able to use SOC, will we? Somebody's already stolen it. Department of Sociology. All right, so fine. I'm going to go ahead and kill this. Stop. There we go. And let's go ahead and correct it. CSE. All right, well, that's why we're computing.unl.edu. Right? Because somebody already stole our domain 50 years ago. Right? Anyway, that's not the password. There's my password. This is why we told you not to use a password that you care about. You will ultimately be storing this at plain text in the Java source file, sharing it with your partner. At the very least, the graders are going to see it. I'm going to be able to see it. Right? So if you've got a password that you care about, now we know your password. Right? Don't do that. Just have some stupid dummy password or the auto-generated one that it gave you when it started. If I go ahead and execute this, it looks okay. I'm crossing my fingers here that this connection was closed in the end. If you're going to open up a file, process that file, what do you need to do with the file at the end? Close it. Same thing with connections, except that connections are way more expensive. A connection is actually holding resources and memory on the server. It's holding and reserving resources and memory on your computer. And also, it's sending back and forth stuff over the network, which is really, really slow. To this day, it doesn't matter how fast you think your internet connection is, it is still slow. What is the most economical way of transferring data? Walking, right? Or driving, right? You can load up a semi full of hard drives, drive it across the country, and then unpack it, load it, and access the data before you can even get a fraction of it sent over a wire, right? There's just still no comparison, right? So we need to make sure that we close our resources. To do that, we do con.close. Right? Unfortunately, once again, we're forced to surround this with a try and catch. For that reason, you may want to move everything into one big try catch. Right? That's perfectly fine. If you want a series of try catch, go ahead. Right? It provides you a little bit more fine-grained control. If you just want to do it in one big giant block, I'm not going to ding you on it either, because you are living with Java's mistakes from 25 years ago with respect to checked exceptions, like SQL exception. Okay? I'll go ahead and do everything in one big giant block here. Okay? Another thing that you might think about doing is, to do this properly, you might want to do it in a finally block. Right? Remember that a finally block is executed at the end of a try block, whether or not an exception occurred. So for example, you could go ahead and close it down here instead. That way, whether or not an exception occurred, you're still closing it down here. Right? What's the problem? Another try catch. Right? Okay, I'll go ahead and do it in another finally statement. I'll do it here. Finally, close. What's the problem? It's a checked exception. Surround that with another try catch. Okay, at that point I'm done. No, I'm not going to do that. Right? Yet another reason why checked exceptions are bad. Right? Where do you? What if the action that you're trying to perform throws a checked exception? Then you need to surround it with a try catch, right? And then there's a never-ending process there. Okay. Another check that you might want to check is, what if we try to close a connection without having opened it? So let me go ahead and get rid of that. Right. Con.close. Well, first of all, it's going to be a null pointer exception here. But if it's already closed, let's go ahead and try to close it twice. There we go. Probably no exception? Okay, good. That's much better. Right. But another check that used to be common would be if con dot is not already closed, then close it. More modern versions of drivers, maybe you don't have to do this anymore. Right? But I mention it because if you get an old driver, you might end up having to do it. Or if you see example code like from your labs next week, we might end up doing it that way. Right? All right, so what is our step-by-step process? We need to create our connection. So let's label this as process, which we just did. You need your username, your URL, and your password. 2, we will create our query and prepare our query and execute our query, and then process the results. So 3, process the results. And then 4, which we've already also done, close your resources. Okay. So we've done 1, we've done 4, because I wanted to make sure that I didn't forget it. But now let's go ahead and do 2 and 3, where we're going to prepare a query and execute that query. Right? I like to write queries over in MySQL Workbench to make sure that they're correct syntactically. Once you've written your query and you're sure that it's correct, then go ahead and bring it over into Eclipse. So create query. I'm going to put that into a string called query. All right? There we go. Then I'm going to prepare that query and execute that query. But before we do that, let's talk about some style notes here. First of all, I don't like superfluous semicolons. You can go ahead and get rid of that. Right? You can put it there if you want. Just be consistent about it. Another thing is, if you wanted to go old school, like if you were back in the 1970s where your monitors were not color monitors, they were colored, it was just that you had one color, green screen, right? You did this, select from person. Why? Because all caps indicates that this is an SQL keyword, right? We don't have to do that anymore because we can afford nice, rich color screens, right? So I like the more modern convention of going all lowercase. One argument for going all uppercase is that now this is a Java string and you do not have code highlighting, syntax highlighting. And if that's the case, then maybe you want to go with all uppercase because it sets those things off, right? I still don't like to do it because I don't like holding down the shift key here and typing the entire thing and getting arthritis, right? Your pinky will thank you if you don't do that, okay? All right, so there's my query. I need to prepare the query. Right? We'll talk about why you want to prepare queries later on. It's to prevent SQL injection attacks. But to do this, we need a representation, and it's called a prepared statement. PS is equal to con.prepare statement of our query. Note that I'm not calling a constructor here. The driver manager is responsible for constructing this connection. The connection is responsible for creating this prepared statement. Oops, not prepared call, dot prepared statement. There we go. Right. And I need to bring this in, import this. Before I forget, I should also close that prepared statement. Which order should I do it in? ps.close. Let's think about this order first of all. I created a connection. The connection then created the prepared statement. What order do I need to close them in if I want to make sure that it's all closed? What if I did the connection first like I'm doing right now? What about that prepared statement? Maybe it gets closed, right? The connection was responsible for it, so maybe it gets closed. I have no idea. Right? You'd actually have to look at the actual code to find out what it does. But generally what you want to do is you want to close them in the reverse order, just like when you create a table table A that depends on table B, B has to be created before A. And if you're going to delete them, you need to make sure that you're deleting them in the reverse order. So if you're going to clean up, you need to make sure that you clean up in the reverse order. Okay? There's my prepared statement. Now I'm going to execute that statement just like I do over here in MySQL Workbench. When I execute this statement, I get a result set back here. These 5 people in the database. Okay? That's represented as a result set. RS is equal to new, or not new, but ps dot execute query. There we go. There are several ways that you can do this, but this is the easiest. Right? And what should I do with my result set? Close that as well. Right? I have the connection, then the prepared statement, then the result set. Therefore, I need to close the result set, then the prepared statement, result set, then the prepared statement, then the connection. Reverse order. Okay. Before I do that, though, I need to actually, pull the data. So process the data. ... When I process data over here in MySQL Workbench, I've got this little arrow here that's pointing to a current record. That's what I'm going to do over here. I'm going to process this record by record by record. This record, then this one, then this one, then this one, then this one. That tells me that I need what over here? Some sort of a loop. Should it be a for loop? Do you know how usually we use for loops when we know up front exactly how many elements are going to be in that collection, right? But do we know how many elements are going to be in this collection? I saw it on the other screen, 5, right? But do we know that every single time? Nope. So I'm going to go ahead and go with a while loop. All right? While you still have data, ... Oops, come on. Data, ... Process the current record. Neither one of those are Java code, but you get the idea. While you still have data. So let's come over here and understand how that's going to work. At the very beginning, I'm not pointing to any record. There's something called a cursor in the result set. And so it's pointing before this. Now, take my cursor right here, and I'm pointing before the first record. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask JDBC, the result set, give me the next record. Okay, there it is. True, there is a next record. It's right there. I'm pointing to it. Give me the next record. True, it's pointing to the second one, right? True, 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 true. What happens when I get down here to a record that doesn't exist? Am I pointing to a valid record at this point? Nope. So, false. Break out of the loop, you're done. You've processed every record in this. The way that I do that is by asking the result set for the next element, which has two effects. First of all, it advances that pointer to the next record. Then it returns true or false. True, there is a record. I'm pointing to it right here. True, true, true. False. That will break me out of the loop. Right? Kind of like when you read line by line with a scanner. Has next line, has next line, has next line, read the next line, read the next line, read the next line. But it all does it in one shot here. Right? It's telling you that it has another line. Okay? Process the current record. So look at the first record here. What do you see? I see a person ID, a first name, a last name, and a date of birth. Let's pull those four values out of that current record. So int person ID is equal to rs.getInt of person ID. Person ID. So the result set will give me an integer representation of whatever this column is. I use column names instead. If you're using aliases, for example, if I selected person ID as foo, then I would use foo down here instead. Right? I'm not going to do that. In fact, we're eventually going to come back and we're going to get rid of this wildcard because it's bad practice. It's perfectly fine over here when you're doing stuff manually, but it's not a good idea when you're doing stuff programmatically. Okay? I've got the person ID. What else do I need? The first name. rs.get string, and that's going to be first name. Oops, there we go. Last name. Last name. Did I have to look back at the database to know what the columns were? I have a great memory. No. Why do I not have to have any guesswork here? The first name and the first name used in the person class over here that I'm eventually going to create, I'm using the exact same naming conventions, right? There's a one-to-one mapping to the person table, person object, person table, first name to the first name of the person class. Right? And then a local date, date of birth, is equal to rs.getLocalDate. Can I do that? Date of birth. Nope. Local date is something special. It was introduced in the Java time library 20 years after JDBC existed. There is no local date here. Instead, what do we need to do? We need to get it as a string. That's not going to work either. A string and a date are not the same thing. So how do I convert that string, which represents a date, in this case, 1912, June 23rd, 1912. That's when Alan Turing was born, right? How do I convert that over? Same thing that you've been doing in your project. Local date.parse, right? rs dot. There we go. Now I've got the four things that define a person. And by the way, I changed the person class. Oh, I did not change the person class yet. Did I? I thought I did. Oh, I guess this is the wrong person. Crypto data, okay. Well, okay, I guess we're not doing anything with it yet. All right, so now I need to create a person. Person P is equal to new person of the person ID, first name, last name. I don't even remember if this is the order, is it? And then date of birth. We'll find out here in a second when I go to that person class. What? I thought I copied these over. Okay, there is person, yeah. All right, so I've got the first name and the last name and the date of birth. What do I not have here? The ID. right? But now that I've got a connection to the database, probably want that now. Private int or integer, because you could create a person that has no connection to the database, in which case you'd want to keep that null. Right? Let's go ahead and do it like that, person ID. There we go. I've got a constructor for a first name and a last name. I probably now want a constructor for all 4 of those things because it's in my database now. So constructor using fields, everything except for emails. Generate. There. And now over here in the demo, I can successfully create that person. Person ID, last name, first name, ... Except that DRY, don't repeat yourself. I see these 3 lines of code. I see these 2 lines of code. They're the same. And by the way, I should be instantiating this down here as well. Right, there we go. So which one, what should I do in this case? I should make sure that this constructor calls that other more general constructor. Null, first name, last name, null, and then there. There we go. What I'm doing is I'm passing in null for the person ID and null for the date of birth because I don't know what they are. Right. Okay. Good. Over here in the demo, what do I do with that person now? Print them out. Do something with P. What? Print it out? That might be useful. What would be even more useful though? Probably collecting everything into a list of people. People is equal to new array list. There we go. Bring list in. Bring array list in. There we go. And down here, do something with it. Let's put it in there. People dot add p. And then once you've loaded all the data, you can go ahead and print it out. For person p in the collection people, system.out.println p. There. Let's run it. We've got Grace Hopper, Alan Turing, Margaret Hamilton, Donald Knuth, and Joe Unix. Was that the order? Yep, that's the same order as over there. Okay. So I've got 5 people. Great. Let's go ahead and focus in on what we're doing here in main. All right. Should this belong in main? Not, I don't think so. Where should it belong? Not the print stuff, but the loading stuff. Let's go ahead and create a new class, database data loader. Right. And let's come over here and create a public static list of person, load persons. There. That's where it belongs. Right. Ooh, that looks darn familiar. Have you done something like this before already? You did it in a data loader class, or if you were to be more specific now that you're loading up data from 2 different sources, potentially, you probably did it from a CSV data loader class, right? It would have looked something like this. Return people. There we go. Something like that, right? And where to do. Load it up from CSV files. ... Okay. Is there any difference between these two? What's wrong? Am I not returning people? Return people. There we go. Now it compiles. If I just go ahead and look at the interface for this, the publicly facing interface, and not the details of how it gets its stuff done, LoadPersons. LoadPersons. Exact same thing, right? Maybe this is an opportunity to do our own, where is it? Dependency inversion. Right? Instead of over here in the main, instead of relying on that one class, so list of person people is equal to database data loader dot load persons. Instead of relying on that one class, and then switching it out with CSV data loader, or maybe in the future you'd want an XML data loader, or a JSON data loader, or one of the other 50 different data formats that you can probably think of. What if instead of relying on this low-level code, what if we changed it up and relied on an interface instead? A data loader interface. DL is equal to new. Here, I'll go ahead and leave it like this for now. There we go. Let me create that that interface. New interface. I'll call it data loader. Is this a CSV data loader? Is this a database data loader? Is it an XML data loader? Is it a JSON data loader? I don't know. Let's just go ahead and put in that interface that should be there. Not that, but that. And you can't make it static. You can have static methods, but they have to have an implementation. There. There's my interface. Now, what if my CSV data loader implements that interface? And what if my database data loader implements that data loader interface? We did not expect this from anybody on phase 1 or 2, right? It's what we did, but we didn't expect this from anybody. We just wanted you to focus on the inheritance with respect to the items, the products, and whatever else, right? But you can start thinking about other ways that you can make your life easier by using these kind of interfaces, right? Oops. There. I don't want any of that. There. Oh, wait, no, I do want that, sorry. What's wrong? Oh, no, I need to take away static, sorry. Static, and then I need to take away static there as well. There we go. Now, what does that look like over here in the demo, right? DL it's going to be complained because it's not because it's null. But all I need to do is change this one line of code. New database data loader. There we go. And it takes care of everything for me. Now, granted, there's only like 4 lines of code after this. But what if there were 100 lines of code that depended on loading this data up in a particular way from a CSV file or from a database or something? I would have to go through and make sure that I change everything to accommodate that. Whereas if I'm relying on this one interface, this generic interface, I've inverted the dependency. I'm only dependent on what is in this interface, not the details by which it implements it. Right? So now I go back to phase 1, and I need a CSV data loader. There we go. CSV file or data, whatever it's called. Right? All I need to do is change that one line. Dependency inversion in practice. Just like writing this code to a connection, prepared statement, and result set, not writing it towards MySQL or Postgres or SQL Server. Right? If you want to use this pattern going forward, we recommend it. Right? All right, let's make sure that this actually works. Oh, no, it doesn't because I need to go to database. Database. Data loader. There we go. Now it'll work. There we go. 4 people, or 5 people. All right, well, what's missing? Let me go ahead and change this so that we're printing out the database ID, right? So this dot person ID, and also say this person's emails. So I'll put that in as a string. Now let's come back over here and see if we've got any emails. All right, remember, Grace Hopper is 10, Alan Turing here is 20. That's all correct over here. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Right? But what about their emails? Do you see them over here? No, because we didn't load them. So should I do that right here? To do, load emails for each person. Is that what you would have done if you were loading it up from a CSV file? Open the file once, load up all the people. Open up the file a second time for the first person to load up their emails. Second person, third person, fourth person, fifth person. So a total of, say, 6 times that you've loaded up that file? No, you wouldn't do that here. A good design. all right, you can load up the people, but if you want to load up the emails, then you have to give me back the people so that I can go ahead and load up the email for each person. Does that sound right? That's called a leaky abstraction. I've leaked out the fact that I'm not loading up all the data. Right? I've leaked out the fact that you need to use me in a different manner in order to get the other data that you want. Right? This should be a one-stop shop, right? LoadPersons. And we don't know about that, so let's go over here to database data loader. Right? Okay. So where should we do it in here? Well, obviously we need to, of course, load every single person first. Once we've loaded that person, we could, of course, go ahead and load the person's emails if we wanted to. Right? Or once we're done with all the people, we could load up each one's emails. 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Right? Do you want to do it here after we've loaded up the person? All right, here, I guess. To do here. Or do it afterwards. We're going to be making more and more connections, so maybe, what if we were to do it here? Am I going to write some big block of code here to do code, 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 right? If you've got a big block of code, what should that be screaming out to you? Maybe put that into a function so you don't have because we're already nested here. How far are we nested? We are 17 characters nested already. Right? You want to make sure that things are not nested as much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, gee, it'd really be really nice if somebody did my work for me. All right, load emails, and I'll just go ahead and say, here's the person. Go ahead and load their emails for me, please. Right? And I'll do that up here. What if I had that? What if I had a public void load emails of a person P, right? To do, right? Load P's emails, dot, 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 right? Then my job down here is done, right? Now I do have to focus on this job up here, okay? All right, so ideas. First of all, void function because we're not actually returning anything. You give me that person, I'll load up their emails, and I'll add them and make sure that that person has them. Should this be public, though? So remember over here in the demo, I said don't make it so that you load up all the people and then you have to give them back to that thing and force them to load up the emails, right? We're going to do that right here in this class as a private method. Maybe you want to make it public, maybe you do, right? Unless you have a very good reason to make this public, you probably just want to make it private so that it can be called within this class, but not from outside of this class. Okay? All right. I need to load person P's emails. So what should I do? I need to make a connection. Right? Copy. Paste. Does that sound like a good idea, first of all? Copy, paste, copy, paste. That should be a real big red flag at this point, right? DRY. Don't repeat yourself. At the very least, what should I be doing with these? Probably making one copy, static copy, right? But also, I mean, there's repeated code here as well. Opening up a connection. What if you created another class and we call them a connection factory, right? Just like Driver Manager creates connections for you. What if we had another class called a connection factory of some sort that did all of this for us? And just give me a connection, give me a connection, give me a connection. It stored all these three things separately in a different file in one location so that when you need to go and change your password because somebody else is screwing around with it, right? Then you change it in one place. Sounds like a better idea? Right? It sounds like such a good idea, we give you bonus for doing it, or it's required in this section. Right? I'll let you do that on your own, though. Right? Remember that you're going to want to close it. Con.close. There we go. All right. So I need to prepare or formulate your query and prepare it. Dot, dot, dot. So I need to pull the emails of this particular person right here. So what's my query going to be? Let's come over here to my SQL workbench and work it out. Let's suppose that it's Grace Hopper there, our first one. How would you pull all of her emails? Select everything from email. Are all of those Grace's emails? Nope, only this one and this one are because of the person ID. So I need a where clause, where person ID is equal to 10. That will give me Grace. There's Grace's emails. Okay. Once I've troubleshot my query, I'll go ahead and cut and paste it and bring it over here. There. Clean it up a bit. I don't like that semicolon there. All right, there we go. Prepared statement. PS is equal to con.prepare statement of the query. Result set. RS is equal to ps.execute query. Right. And then iterate over it while rs.next. You'll see a very familiar pattern emerging here. I could have cut and pasted everything, virtually everything. And then you might be asking yourself, should I go the extra mile and put all of this into some generic function? That's going a bit too far. What you're doing then is you are recreating what's called an ORM, right? You are writing your own ORM at that point, in which case rethink what you're doing and just use an ORM. I'll show you how to later. All right, so while you've still got an email here, right, string address is equal to rs dot get string. There we go. And what was it called? If I execute this, it's called, that's address. Yeah, I didn't need to look that up. There we go. And then add it to the person, p.add email address. You can do it in a one-liner if you want, so to relieve you of the need of creating another variable. Now, is this going to work? Let's find out. Grace Hopper, Grace Hopper. Grace at hopper.net. Except that Alan Turing has Grace Hopper's emails. Joe Unix has Grace Hopper's emails. Right. Okay, back to the drawing board. What did I do? I hard-coded this value here, right here. Right? So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to change this. What is it? I don't know. That's why we use this question mark. It's called a placeholder. Okay? You prepare your statement, and then what you want to do is you want to replace that placeholder with the actual value that that person has. ps.set integer. Down here, the result set, you get an integer, you get a string. With a prepared statement, you set an integer. And it's going to be 1, and in this case, p.get. Oh, I don't have a getter. Okay, fine. I will have a getter for first name, last name. There we go. Public int get person ID. There we go. Return this dot person ID. There. Dot get person ID. There. I'm setting the first one. That's what that one is for. If you had multiple ones, and foo is equal to the second one, and bar is equal to a third one, then you would set the first one, the second one, the third one. Note here, where does it start? At 1, not at 0. Don't ask me why. Right? It departs from everything that computer scientists are used to. We always start counting at 0. But in this case, they didn't do that. Lots of really weird quirks here. But otherwise, this first placeholder would be 1, 2, and then 3. But we only have one placeholder here, so we end up setting it like that. Can somebody think of a potentially easier way of doing this? At least for this particular example. Why should I have to prepare this at all? Why can't I just go ahead and concatenate p.getPersonID? And you can do that until little Bobby Tables comes along and you've just opened yourself up to an injection attack. Little Bobby Tables comes along and ends up dropping your database. Right? Don't do that. If you ever see yourself doing concatenation with strings in a query string in any language, you are doing something wrong. Right? Look for a prepared statement, or sometimes they're called sanitize your queries, ... using this question mark here, preparing the statement, and then explicitly setting it. Why? Because suppose that there are special characters in there, like say double quotes, and it's an integer, so that's not an issue. But what if you output it as a scientific notation instead? Now it's a string for some reason, right? Then the prepared statement will take care of all those details for you, and you don't have to worry about it. Okay? Let's see if it works. Taken forever, but it worked. There, Grace Hopper, Alan Turing does not have any emails. Margaret Hamilton has a Yahoo address. And then Donald Knuth here has 3 of them. Usually when they're contiguous like that, you just forget what your email was. So 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever. Right? And then Joe Unix here, we don't have any. Make sure that you close your connections. Right? If you don't, rs.close, oops, close, ps.close. Right? If you don't and you open up a connection, great, fine. You keep it open. Open up a second connection, third connection, fourth connection. You'll be fine all the way up to 30 connections. When you try to get that 31st connection and you haven't closed any of the previous 30, then that's when the show is over. You are allowed only 30 persistent connections at all, right? So you can close them and then reopen them if you want. But if you try to open up 31 connections at the same time, you will end up getting an error, right? So for, do I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? I don't have enough data here to show you how that works, right? I suppose we could insert a bunch of new data, but to show you that if this one person had 31 emails and I never closed those connections off, then I wouldn't be able to get that 31st connection, that 31st email. Okay. I guess there's only one per person, so if I had 31 people, I wouldn't be able to do this if I don't close all those connections. All right. Otherwise, there you go. A very easy start to your project even. Right? Again, JDBC is not until phase 4 and 5. So you've got plenty of time, but we'll talk about how to persist data and best practices on Friday. There's a question online. How do I hack Wi-Fi using Java? It's a good question. I'll answer it here right now.